the economy is not in a good position. When you look at the job market, it's not in a good position. I mean, the credit card debt speaks to that. The price points speak to that. We're not in a good position, and we're heading towards that R word that no one likes to talk about. Welcome back to the What's More podcast. I'm your host, Quinton Harris, with my standing co-host, Lenny Curry, joining us today. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be back.
Yeah, man, great to have you. So, hey, last episode, we talked a little bit about the debate and the kind of the woes and this and that, and, had some great audience feedback from that one. But I thought what we would do a little bit more is talk a little bit about our financial implications of both candidates here. We've heard some recent commentary as of just yesterday from both candidates that were rather interesting. And while I don't want to pick on either one of them, I want to talk about, if this, then that. What does it mean? And so, one of the things we saw was that, Kamala came out and said, hey, listen, she wants to put fixed pricing on groceries to help the American citizen, average Joe that's paying high inflated costs. And I could see how that has a direct impact to the voter. And, quite frankly, it might be the first policy I've heard her talk about here. But and then Trump kind of countered and said, hey, listen, I'll put a cap on credit card charges, basically credit card interest rate charges. Thought both of these were interesting. Trump was in New York speaking at his rally, and then Kamala was at her rally, and she said the fixed cap on groceries here. From like an analyst standpoint, being in that arena, what is your take on those two things right there? Because both of them have drastic impacts, but also appeal to the American public as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say on the fixing the prices on groceries, I mean, you being a financial guy will know there's many effects there. I mean, why are groceries up? Why are the costs of other goods and services up? Because we've flooded the market with cash, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Devalued the power of spending. And I don't think any serious economist would tell you that fixing prices would fix that. There'll be other ramifications down the road, right? That may even be worse, right? And what about the people that have to grow the food, manufacture the food, haul the food, move it by trucks or train or however? I mean, those costs are real, right?
Yeah, the supply chain costs are significant. We continue to see those go up.
Right.
So fixing that would directly impact them.
So I think that sounds probably great to people. Mm-hmm. Oh, the cost of groceries are going to go down, but it won't be real.
Yeah.
Just like when they pumped all the money into the economy, that wasn't real. There will be a day of reckoning coming. As far as credit cards go, I mean, look, there's a number of people using their cards, right? And if we were talking before the show that rates on cards are so high because it's a risk assessment of repayment, right?
100%.
But those very people that need access to cash because of what's happening are paying interest rates right now that will further put them into poverty and further potentially bankrupt them, right?
Right.
So I like the idea that former President Trump is trying to find a solution to that problem.
And I think the two things kind of go hand in hand. You're capping both industries to appeal to the same person, right? Because the person that's probably living, and when I say living off credit cards, I mean like you're financing like your life, not your lifestyle, right? That's where we've turned to here in the U.S. economy with where we've been. Well, capping the amount you spend on groceries, that would help cap the amount you're spending. And then if you cap the amount of interest that you pay on that, that could help also the affordability metric of that. I think there's two, and you kind of talked to it a minute ago, the producers and the logistics side of things, that's going to impact them. I kind of feel like both of these, though, are like, I'm at a class election, right? I'm at a high school election. It's like there'll be off-campus lunches and this, no one has to go to this class because a lot of this stuff is appealing to the audience, but we recognize
Get the Monday off after the Super Bowl.
There you go,
it's
Monday off after the Super Bowl. That stuff's hard to really implement. And of both of those, I don't see how you could do either, quite frankly. I don't think there's any way you get price caps on groceries, even though I think it's at the heart of some of the biggest complaints of the American citizens. But talk a little bit about that credit card debt. What's happening right now is we're at the highest credit card debt levels in America. So to Trump's point, former President Trump's point, is he's like, hey, listen, I want to help that, right? But he also knows, just as well as anybody that follows that, is that the banks that issue that's a very competitive market. Credit card lending is a huge competitive market. But it also is a high-priced market because of the risk that you mentioned is that you can't recoup or recapture anything. There's no repossession of items.
Your default rate is built into that interest rate,
That's right? That's exactly right. Just so what happens is the people that don't default are paying the same rate as the people that do to absorb the people that default. That's how it works, And same thing with like PMI. That's how that whole thing is operated, is that it's a default paid higher risk premium to make up for those that default. Well, what we're finding right now is that credit card defaults, delinquency rates, if you may, 90 days or later, they're up there. We're in the double digits now, almost 13%. We're rivaling some of that 2008, 2009 credit card default debts. And so these become warning signs in the economy of flashing. Hey, listen, this isn't a good place to be. And then the typical second one, that's a leading indicator. Credit cards are always leading. The second one right behind that is cars. You start to see it with car delinquencies, and car delinquencies are now at 8%.
And those are up where they've historically been for years.
That's correct. They're getting closer. They're getting closer to that 2008 level. And so I think what you have right now, and again, we talked a little bit about this, is that the economy is not in a good position. When you look at the job market, it's not in a good position. The credit card debt speaks to that. The price point speak to that. We're not in a good position, and we're heading towards that R word that no one likes to talk about.
If you are middle class, working wage, or even below that, if you're in the poverty space, all that whole group of people right now are struggling and having to make really, really hard decisions.
Sure.
About where they spend their dollar and how they spend their dollar. Right?
Absolutely. If you're in the 1% category, this market isn't. We're not talking about that's not impacting that group, right? Their woes are farly different than that other 99% of America.
That's right.
And that's broken into different levels of middle class, poverty, lower class, middle income. But the reality is, the group that you're talking about, that's the majority of voters right now.
If you make a decent wage and you've got a few kids, whether they're in public schools or private schools, or kids in college, with all those obligations, again, even if you make a decent wage in this economy, it's not easy. So
let me ask you this, and I'm going to put you on the spot here. We can say, I don't know here, but if you were an advisor to Kamala, what advice would you do to offer some perspective? And I'll make it real easy here. What type of economic platform would you advise her to run on for the general public? For these people we're talking about, what kind of suggestions would you say, hey, listen, you really want to speak to the heart of these people? Here's how we could help. What kind of suggestions would you throw at her?
Well, that's hard. I mean, because the difference between, policy speak versus actually speaking to the average person. I mean, I would say policy-wise, we know that loose money that we've had over time doesn't work. Okay. Right?
Right. It's usually a recipe for disaster or inflation. That's what we got.
Nobody cares about years ago, even 10 years ago, in these campaigns, you'd hear people talking about the national debt, right? No one talks about it anymore.
Oh,
no one cares.
It's at 34.3.
And maybe here's why no one cares. Because our government's been telling us for years in these campaigns that the higher the national debt, the sky's going to fall. And the sky hasn't fallen yet.
Right.
But it will eventually.
Oh, it will.
Right?
Yeah, the roosters come to crow. It'll happen at some point.
I mean, so I would say this may not win an election for either candidate, but it's what we have to bake into who we are as a country long term and get people back to free markets.
Yeah, almost like the Ross Perot type mentality that was there during that time when he came in.
That's right. The graphs.
I was going to say the pie charts. No one liked it.
Right.
But damn if he wasn't right.
Right.
He didn't win on popularity votes, unfortunately, but he brought the financial fiscal aspect of the election right to the forefront of your home and got you to think for a minute, like, okay, wait a minute, we do have an issue we need to address. And he tried to run the campaign like a business.
Correct.
And he didn't win a lot. He wasn't a popular guy.
And he was honest with very direct with people. Don't tell people the economy's okay when they're putting gas in their car and they're going, oh my gosh. I mean, you hear stories now of people, they don't fill their tank up, right? Oh. They put enough gas in to get around for a couple of days.
You go there and see $5 or $7.
Right.
That's just to get around.
People aren't going out to eat as much as they used to, right? I mean if you go to fast food, pull through a McDonald's.
Yeah, it's not what it once was.
Correct.
Right. And you're also seeing this in the Starbucks category too, because if you just, to your point, Starbucks reported loss of revenue and loss of potential, what they call sales. Their sales were down significantly. And what they're finding is that if you go look at the polar opposite of that, go look at the Kirkland K-Cup brand, through the roof right now.
Oh, right.
Yeah, their profits are up
would make
80%,
sense.
right? So it's the trade-off. To your point, it's a trade-off. So more people are doing things and finding ways to save money. So, I think from a policy standpoint, and I'll flip that side of the coin. What advice would you offer former President Trump to help the American people right now? What
Run on your record.
Okay.
Tell people what you did. Remind people what it looked like when you were president.
Have you come across people that have come up to? I just teed you up for that one. Have you ran across people that said, my household financials? It doesn't matter what side of the table they lay on. Have they said to you, my household financials looked far better during the 2018, 2022 Trump era than it did during the 2016, 2020 Trump era versus the 2024 era of Biden?
I've heard a version of that. But here's what I hear people saying. I hear people talk. Example, we're going into, this past summer, get into the spring, into the summer. People that typically would maybe have their landscape people come out and do the yards for them. I mean, I know a handful of people that just like, we're going to do it ourselves this time, this year, right?
Yeah.
Because every dollar matters. But yeah, I've heard people say that. Yeah, I think they're not as well off today as they were a few years ago.
Yeah, that's exactly what I had a person tell me 2 days ago in a phone conversation. And I don't talk to this person a lot. It was a very infrequent conversation, but this person felt the need to volunteer that.
Right.
They said, hey, what'd you think about that debate the other night? And I was like, hey, I'm not getting into this. We're not that kind of close. And he said, well, I'll tell you what I think. And he goes, it was horrible to watch, but at the end of the day, my household financials looked a lot better during this era versus this era right now. And, depending on what side of the coin on, you can argue inflation, you can argue this, you can argue that. But at the end of the day, here's some things that we know. You can't stand up in front. The Federal Reserve is who I'm going to talk about right now. Stood at the podium yesterday and said, being Jerome Powell, stood at the podium and said, we think the economy's in good shape. We're not worried about it. And quite frankly, 4.2 unemployment rate is not that bad.
Right.
Now, I see you chuckle because we both know people that have lost their jobs as of recently in our circles. 4.2 is what's interesting is that is a measurement of people that are taking unemployment from the government, right? That's called the U3 rate.
Right.
The U6 rate is the amount of unemployed people, including those that aren't taking money or eligible for government relief, right? So it wasn't until 1994 we started using that U3, just what they take from the government. We're at 8% unemployment. If you look at look at the previous measurement, we're at 8%. Pretty high.
Right.
You could also say the work population force is much larger now than it was in 1994. That 4.2 is a far greater number than what's getting credit.
That's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people. And so when you have that, to your point, you have people that aren't spending money. They're finding ways to cut.
Yep.
They're debt financing through credit card, and they're working multiple jobs.
Right.
Highest on record ever.
Well, think of
how is that healthy?
But think of that cycle. So if in your household, the example I used, you've cut back on using the guy
to do the
that
yard.
does your yard landscaping. Well, now his business and his life's affected. Now he's cutting back on something.
Sure.
It's vicious, right?
Yeah.
It just keeps going and going and going. If the wage you make, if you're making the same wage today you were making 5 years ago, or 4 years ago, or 3 years ago,
You're in trouble.
If I had a chart, the stuff you have to spend money on, the stuff that you can't make a choice not to spend on, right? Your groceries, your gas,
electricity, utilities, you name it.
Everything, right?
Everything.
Insurance rates.
Absolutely those. I mean, it's a tough.
So the math doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work.
Right?
It doesn't work.
You were taking in this and you were spending this. Now you may be spending this. You might even be spending this just as a function to live.
Yeah. I'll say this. Another thing is that for the longest time, what baffles me about this is regulation versus deregulation. I live in a very regulated environment in the banking world, right? I often joke, I'm like, the world we live in right now, I was like, I can't even go to the bathroom without the permission of the regulators. It's that regulated. But I have always found that regulations hinders growth. It hinders small business growth, and it hinders growth of the current economic system because it's so regulated.
Right.
And I think that what we're seeing is, take away the money that was pumped in the system. I think there's so many caps around the growth of our small businesses and businesses in general. That's another thing that's cramping the ability for pay raises. Another thing that's cramping the ability for product growth, new era growth. And regardless of who's in charge of what policies and where, we need to deregulate a lot of the things that are currently capped that are stopping a lot of this growth.
I agree.
It's
I mean, yeah. I mean, if you
bad.
you just you could open a whole can of a policy analysis on this for a presidential candidate. Even local city governments could do this. But you have to have a license to do anything nowadays, right?
Oh,
anything.
Yeah.
And that is it. So if you are, say, you are someone that is unemployed right now, but you're willing to hustle, you're willing to go out and start, but you don't have a lot of capital. You're willing to go out and start some business on a street corner. You can't do it.
No.
Right?
Not at all.
You can't do it. You can't just set up shop. You'll get shut down because you don't have the right license. You didn't do this right and you didn't do that right.
Yeah, the free enterprise days are pretty much gone at this point from
Right.
the state and federal level. And that regulation, I often talk about it in my business, the things that have hindered the growth. And going back to the credit card thing, another reason those rates are so high is the regulation in the credit card world. If you recall, late fees used to be determined by the creditor. Now, when the previous administration before Trump was President Obama, they put caps on that, right? And I understand why they're protection caps. But if there was a time when you used to make a payment over the phone and they would charge you to make that payment over the phone, you could have went on the internet and made the payment for free, but you weren't comfortable doing that. You were the call in and make it over the phone.
Right.
So they charged you because they had to pay that person to sit in that seat,
Right.
take that credit card payment, and they charged you a percentage or a flat fee to do that. Well, that was eliminated. And all of these eliminations started saying, okay, well, these are the ways they're making money, and the way they make that money suppresses the rate.
So they got to build it in.
Yeah, they got to build it in.
See, that's what
regulation at its
what
finest.
people need to understand, right? That's what needs to be explained. That when government forces something,
The consumer always loses.
the business is going to have to find a way to recoup that cost,
Right.
Or they won't function as a business, right?
Right.
They're going to pass it on somewhere.
They always do.
Right.
They always do. I mean, take a look at when's the last time you heard there was a time for a decade, free checking. When's the last time you heard someone say free checking, unless you're on the private banking side? When's the last time you've seen them say, you get free checks, we'll let you go to any ATM, no fees? You don't see that anymore.
Right.
Because they took away, hell, when you walk into a bank half the time, there might be 2 people there, maybe.
Right.
Because they don't want you, the banks don't want you coming in and doing everything. They want it all online, mobile checking, mobile deposits, mobile everything, because they've taken away the abilities for the banks to make money at the checking level now. So how do they make it? At the credit card level.
Right.
That's why it's so competitive. They make it at lending money out. And then when you start regulating how they do that, they're going to raise the rate.
You taught me something now. Because I hadn't walked into a physical bank in years, and I had to go into one a couple months ago.
I bet it was a disaster.
I mean, there weren't many people working, and it took a very long time.
I mean, there used to be a point you walk in and they know you by name.
It took a very long time.
Yeah.
And then we can get on a whole nother tangent here. I had an issue with a bank, and because they want everything online,
Yep.
they wanted me to talk to my their little artificial intelligence
their
person.
kiosk, the person,
Online. And,
The AI person.
And that AI person
Yep.
got it all wrong, and then I had to get, anyway.
Yeah, no, it's a terrible experience. So you're making my point, though. When you regulate something, it offers a terrible consumer experience in one of 2 ways. And oftentimes it's both the ways. And the cost goes up and the actual user experience goes down.
Right.
These 2 things always happen when there's regulation. And I'll pick on whoever's in charge. It doesn't matter what platform they're on or what side of the table they're on. It's the regulation in general. And this dates all the way back to Dodd-Frank in the banking world. That has not helped anything for the consumer. And at the end of the day, a lot, we talk about why the cost of loans and cost of this are expensive, because there's so much regulation and there's so many compliance checkpoints that have to be done now. The cost of all this has gone up dramatically
But we're
every
past
year.
the point of no return, right?
We're past the point of no return.
I mean,
well, the only way that you're never going to
you
pull that curtain back
need a
again.
massive congressional overhaul.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
Which means you'd need to have one party in complete control of both chambers, right?
Right.
That have the guts to go in and actually do something big.
Well,
when's the last time we saw that happen?
Yeah, Reagan. Yeah, pretty much. Reagan.
Right.
Clinton also did it because, he's the last president actually talking about national debt. He was the last one to actually reduce it, right, successfully. But it's interesting, another most recent form of, like, you look at regulation and stuff, when you look at the DOJ, look at what it's doing to real estate right now. And that's a large portion of our audience. So I'll point this out. You look at what they're picking on right now. I cannot believe how they have turned the entire real estate industry upside down. Because what they've done is this. They've said in the past, historically, and this dates back like to the 30s, the way real estate was conducted was that if you're selling your home, you sign a listing agreement with a listing agent. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes that was somewhere between 5-6%. You're selling your home. That's the fee. And inside of that fee, that's a co-op fee to me, the buyer's agent, who's bringing a buyer to the table. So that fee would be paid for by the seller and absorbed in the price of the home. And the buyer comes, looks at a home. They don't pay a real estate agent. It's absorbed in that dual comp inside of the listing agreement. Well, as of recently, they've said, oh, well, that's a problem because the seller shouldn't be paying that. And they have ample reasons and lawsuits that took place, which are all, nefarious in their own way. But now they're saying, okay, as a buyer's agent, I have to agree with Charlie, and Charlie and I have to agree to a fee now up front before I show him anything. And I have to determine my worth to him, and he and I have to agree, even though he's got to pay closing costs, he's got to pay down payment. Now he's got to find a way to potentially come out of pocket to pay me. And if I go show a home and it's your home and you're agreeing to have that dual comp, then you would absorb it and Charlie wouldn't have to pay it. But there are some homes, many more than I expected, where the listing agent and the seller are going, no, I'm not going to pay it. Well, how do you think that's going to work when he's trying to finance and put low down payment down? Does he have 2.5% to come out of pocket? No. But the world we live in, regulation, DOJ, has stepped in and they've said, we want to split that up. So
what happens in that scenario?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, what you're seeing happen in some cases are things that are unintended consequences. The buyer's agent may not show that home because they know that the listing agent and the seller aren't willing to pay, and he can't afford that, right? So on to the next home. So it actually hurts the seller in many cases, right? It hurts the seller. I'm not saying it happens all the time, but I'm saying that's probably the outcome of what's going to happen. That home doesn't get as many views.
And that's
as it
new.
Should. That's new.
Yeah,
that's July. I
think
July,
I read headlines.
But we're like July 17th, and then I think it took effect August. All the forms took effect on August 18th. But anyhow, the long and short of it is that's regulation. And if it would keep its nose out of businesses, again, the consumer would do better because in this case, the consumer's not going to win. Like the buyer now is having to pay more. The seller's going to hurt if they don't pay it because they're not going to get as many views on their home. The price of the home is probably going to not get as many offers to drive the price up to get more. It's a cycle, right? But none of that's painted in that picture. And you can go on industry to industry to industry. Airlines is another great example. I mean, I could go on for days with this. Whatever regulation steps in,
you started on airlines.
Yeah, right? So, it's just one of those cycles where, my advice to these candidates, both of them would be, find a way to make the environment that we're in right now better. At some level, make it better. Find a way to make home ownership more attainable for every person, no matter what income class that they're in. And maybe that's by helping remove some of the red tape of local and state counties so that more homes can be built, incentivize builders, and give people an opportunity to be a homeowner. And then also find a way, in my opinion, to not try to regulate every industry so much and have your hands in so much. That,
I agree.
If you go over to let's take Dubai, for example, right? Now there's a lot of things you could argue with on that, but they have one of the largest, most functional ports in the country. I think it's like a top 10. And then there are reasons why more companies are relocating over there because it's a fluid industry over there with a lot of less regulation.
Easy to do business.
Easy to do business.
Yeah.
Easy to do business. And I know they've got their own problems over there.
Right.
For people online, you're going, yeah, but what about this and that? I get it. I'm talking about from a spirited growth of business. There's less regulation involved in that. And that's why a little bitty port, it's little, is booming. And we have these massive ports that aren't even in the top 10. Let that set in for a minute. They're not even in the top 10 in the world. There's something to be said about that.
Do you think with all the uncertainty in the world right now, with what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, the stuff that's going on in the Middle East, it seems like that volatility and uncertainty has already been baked into our economy right now. Like there's not really an overreaction. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. It's almost like a numbing reaction.
Right.
You're like, oh, well, there it is again.
Right.
Like expected almost.
Right.
Yeah. No, I would say that there's that volatility should concern us from a global level.
Right.
We should be a lot more concerned than the numbing response that we're getting, not only from the news, but also just from the candidates and people in general. There are larger issues there, and it's horrible what's happening over there, and there are tremendous losses that are taking place that should not be happening.
Right. Yep.
Right. And by no means is it our duty to impose our will and our beliefs on other countries, but there is some level of responsibility to be like, this shit ain't okay.
Right.
You know what I mean? And not only that, the impacts that it's going to have economically on a global front. We are a global economy. Like we can't sit back and ignore these things. And over in the Middle East, there's one major thing they have that we need a lot of.
That's right.
A lot of it.
That's right.
And you can't ignore that. I mean, we had a whole era where we went to war over that.
That's
like,
right.
Don't ignore that. And no matter how green we want to get, we're still going to need that. I mean, I always laugh and say, yeah, we can get as green as we want, but the world runs on oil. period.
And diesel, right?
Oil, diesel, you name it. And whether you like it or not,
Right.
that's what it is. You know, whether you like it or not, the reason some of that stuff shows up at your house, your grocery store and areas, that's all right
like
on
that
that.
bowl of cereal in the morning, or those eggs, or
These cups,
this
everything,
is liquid death,
these
folks.
cameras.
Those that are watching, this is not an alcoholic beverage. It's
That's
sparkling
right.
water.
There you go. All this stuff, though, arrives.
Diesel. That's arrived on a diesel.
That's right. Arrives that way. It didn't just show up by stance.
Right.
So yeah, no, that's a global thing that, you know, talk about all the time. And, you know, it's kind of laughed. We were talking about this pre-show. It's like my daughter's in this U.S. government / economic high school class, and they're teaching them some great things. I actually am enjoying it. She's bringing it right home. We're doing some work. They're learning all about inflation. They're learning about supply and demand curves, and they're talking about policies. And I'm like, well, what do they say about the two candidates that are policy? She goes, oh, Dad, they avoid that at all costs. They don't even bring that up. People ask, and they say, I'd rather not talk about that. And they move on. I'm like, touche.
It's called job protection.
Job protection. That's right. In today's world, job protection. So, well, man, hey, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for chopping
Enjoyed
it up here.
it very much.
Always appreciate your insight and feedback. It's great to have great perspective.
I said this one time before. I'll say it again, because you know Joe Rogan from time to time likes to talk about aliens, and at some point we're going to get into life in outer space.
Man, I tell you what, you're going to lead the conversation on that one. I'll just
I don't know where it heads, but it sounds fun.
Last questions and laugh about it here. Well, hey, thanks for being on the show, guys. If you like what you're hearing, please share the podcast, 5-star review on any platform you listen to. Check out our YouTube channel. Just as Lenny said, go subscribe as he's got to do on here at What's Your One More with the number 1. And guys, if you enjoy this, we appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you at the next episode.
Got one more shot, I'm gonna make it. One more chance, I'm gonna take it. I meant it when I said it, now it's time for me to do it. I got